Memory is a fragile storyteller. It does not preserve the past, it negotiates with it, especially when fear is involved. The mind rewrites, rearranges, and disguises the things that once cut too deeply, softening the edges until even the darkest films feel smaller, safer, almost harmless when recalled years later. But that isn't truth. That is survival instinct. Some horror films live entirely inside these altered memories. Fans swear they were campy, silly, exaggerated. They insist the tone was lighter, the violence less jarring, the themes less disturbing. Yet when these films are seen again, not through nostalgia, but through clarity, they reveal themselves as far colder, heavier, and more unsettling than time allowed us to remember. Tonight's journey is not about curses, lost footage, or hidden secrets on set. It is about what your own mind concealed from you. These 15 films were distorted not by the studios, nor by critics, but by the audience's collective need to soften what once felt unbearable. Traumatic plots, disguised as quirky storytelling, bleak narratives misremembered as camp, psychological collapse rewritten as stylistic chaos. Underneath every funny memory is a truth the mind quietly pushed aside. But we are reopening those doors. As we revisit each title exactly as it was, not as it has been remembered, you will feel the distance collapse. And when the real versions emerge, sharp and unfiltered, they will challenge not only what you thought about these films, but what you trust about your own memory. Fact 1. The Children, 1980. In pop culture memory, The Children is often reduced to absurdity. Radioactive fog, blackened fingernails, little kids turned into killers. A premise so strange that it becomes easier to laugh at than to take seriously. But when the film is revisited, the absurdity fades, replaced by a creeping sorrow that makes the story far more disturbing than memory suggests. The children remembered as comical figures appear hauntingly wrong in their stillness. Their faces are blank, as if emptied of humanity. Their slow, deliberate movements feel unnatural, their gestures echoing the innocence they no longer possess. What once seemed silly now becomes a violation of the most primal bond, the trust between a parent and a child. The adults, dismissed in memory as overacted caricatures, emerge as figures drowning in confusion and grief. Their hesitation isn't incompetence, it's heartbreak. They are confronted with a truth they cannot emotionally process. The danger comes not from monsters, but from the people they love most. The rural setting deepens the dread. Empty roads, silent houses, no witnesses, no help coming. The isolation amplifies every tragedy, every confrontation, every impossible choice. Memory made the children seem outrageous. The film reveals a mournful horror wrapped in the innocence it destroys. Fact 2. The Stepfather, 1987. Some viewers file The Stepfather away as a neat suburban thriller, a charming man with a dark secret, a family learning too late who he truly is. But that familiar version is a sanitized memory, stripped of the film's deepest horror. A fresh viewing reveals a chilling meditation on identity. Not the identity we choose, but the persona we force onto the world when reality refuses to cooperate. The stepfather himself, remembered as a charismatic sociopath, becomes far more disturbing upon rewatch. His politeness feels rehearsed, his warmth seems fragile, ready to shatter at the slightest contradiction. He doesn't just want a perfect family, he requires it, as though perfection were the only thing tethering him to sanity. When the world around him deviates from his script, even by inches, the cracks spread with terrifying speed. The suburban setting, misremembered as an idyllic backdrop, reveals a quiet complicity. Neighbors smile without looking closely. Teachers and friends accept the facade without question. The veneer of normal life becomes the camouflage that enables him to remake reality in his image. The violence, too, is remembered incorrectly. Not explosive, not chaotic, but deliberate, each strike an attempt to erase the pieces of a life that no longer align with his fractured fantasy. The Stepfather isn't about a killer hiding behind a mask. It's about a man who can't survive unless everyone else wears one. Fact 3. The New Kids, 1985. In the softened memory of many viewers, The New Kids plays like a rough-edged teen thriller, loud, rebellious, dramatic, and exaggerated in that familiar 80 seconds way. But the truth beneath that recollection is far more sinister. A rewatch uncovers a film that isn't about teenage angst at all, but about cruelty blossoming in a place where authority is absent, empathy is scarce, and violence grows unchecked. The siblings at the heart of the story, remembered as plucky outsiders, appear far more fragile upon revisiting the film. Their grief is fresh, their hope is thin. Their attempt to adapt to a new town is met not with curiosity, but with predatory interest from the local gang, a group often misremembered as over-the-top punks, but who reveal themselves as deeply disturbed young men intoxicated by the feeling of control. The carnival setting, once recalled as a lively backdrop, becomes a nightmarish stage where innocence is stripped away. Its bright colors feel artificial, its shadows too deep. Every ride, every tent, every empty space feels like a warning. The violence, which memory frames as typical genre climax, is far more intimate and unnerving when rewatched. It is not spectacle, it is escalation. What nostalgia labeled a loud teen showdown is, in reality, a descent into a kind of madness that feels frighteningly plausible. Memory made it wild. The film makes it dangerous. Fact 4. Monkey Shines, 1988. Over time, Monkey Shines has slipped into the realm of misunderstood thrillers, its premise remembered as so strange it borders on unintentionally comedic. But beneath that distorted recollection is a suffocating drama about powerlessness, dependency, and the terror of losing control over one's own life. The protagonist, often remembered simply as a man adjusting to paralysis, reveals a deeper torment when revisited. His world shrinks to the dimensions of his room. Every object becomes a reminder of what he can no longer reach. Every interaction reflects a hierarchy he cannot escape. His silence, his stillness, his forced patience, these become the film's true sources of horror. The monkey, flattened in memory into a mischievous side character, becomes chillingly complex. It observes with uncanny intelligence. Responding to emotions the protagonist tries desperately to suppress. Their bond, instead of being quirky or humorous, emerges as a psychological tether, one that binds them tighter as resentment, jealousy, and unspoken rage simmer beneath the surface. The home becomes a battlefield. The monkey, a mirror. The protagonist, a prisoner in more ways than one. Memory made the story absurd. A fresh viewing reveals a tragedy unfolding in slow motion. Fact 5. The Funhouse 1981. The Funhouse often returns to memory as a vibrant carnival slasher, loud colors, flashing lights, and the familiar thrill of teenagers stumbling into danger. But a closer viewing shatters that bright recollection. The carnival is not a place of excitement. It is a decaying world where joy has died, but the remnants of it continue to twitch under flickering bulbs. The midway performers, remembered as quirky or humorous, now seem worn thin by a life spent behind masks, literal and metaphorical. Their painted smiles fail to hide exhaustion. Their routines feel less like entertainment and more like resignation. The carnival itself groans under the weight of unspoken despair. At the center stands the so-called monster. A figure memory reduces to a gimmick, but rewatching reveals a far more tragic creature. His violence is inseparable from the humiliation and exploitation he has endured. He is terrifying, yes, but also a product of an environment where compassion has evaporated and cruelty is currency. The teenagers, once dismissed as typical genre fodder, become symbols of unprepared innocence wandering into a world already broken. Their fear is not only for their lives, but for the realization that the darkness here is older and deeper than they imagined. Memory made the Funhouse entertaining. The truth shows a carnival on its last breath. Fact 6. Tourist Trap 1979. In the collective imagination, Tourist Trap often lingers as a bizarre oddity. Mannequins that move, psychic flourishes, a killer with theatrical flair. But rewatching the film strips away every trace of the quirky cult classic label. What emerges instead is a smothering nightmare steeped in loneliness, delusion, and the uncanny dread of objects that feel a little too alive. The mannequins, remembered by many as cheap props, take on a disturbingly lifelike presence. Their vacant stares seem to follow the characters, their frozen smiles stretched into grotesque imitations of human expression. They populate the environment like forgotten ghosts, each one amplifying the sense that this place is a graveyard of discarded identities. The old roadside attraction, once recalled as mere set dressing, reveals itself as a liminal space untouched by time or reason. Dust hangs in the air, light bends strangely, silence feels heavy, as if it's listening. And at the center of this eerie tableau stands the antagonist, not quirky, not eccentric, but fractured. His loneliness has mutated into something predatory, and the mannequins become extensions of his unraveling mind. What viewers misremember as camp is, upon revisiting, an atmosphere of creeping madness, an environment where humanity and imitation blend until neither can be trusted. Memory made tourist trap weird. The film makes it terrifying. Fact 7. April Fool's Day 1986. April Fool's Day is often fondly recalled as the friendly slasher, a playful twist on genre conventions that trades gore for cleverness. But a return viewing exposes a film that is far more uneasy beneath its surface. What nostalgia frames as harmless fun becomes, on rewatch, a delicate dissection of trust, manipulation, and the breaking point of friendship. The island, remembered as charming and picturesque, transforms into an isolated stage where every interaction becomes a test. The pranks once laughed off as cheeky humor slowly reveal their darker undertones. They pry at insecurities. They expose vulnerabilities. They blur the line between performance and sincerity until the characters themselves begin to wonder whether anyone around them is telling the truth. The group dynamic decays in small increments. Smiles stiffen, conversations falter. Fear, initially brushed aside as part of the game, settles in like a draft that won't go away. By the time the final twist arrives, it carries much more emotional weight than memory allows. It's not just a clever ending, it's a reminder of how fragile our bonds become when trust is treated as something expendable. Memory called it playful. The film whispers something more somber. Even jokes can wound. Fact 8. Happy Birthday to Me 1981. In popular memory, Happy Birthday to Me exists as a parade of outrageous kills and melodramatic twists, a slasher celebrated for its excess and theatricality. But viewed again, the film sheds its reputation for spectacle and reveals a story steeped in instability, identity crisis, and the psychological suffocation of a girl who no longer recognizes herself. The protagonist, often recalled as enigmatic and stylish, becomes a heartbreaking figure upon rewatch. Her memories flicker, her relationships falter. She moves through familiar spaces as though they belong to someone else. The film's shifting tone, long dismissed as unintentional camp, reflects the disintegration of her inner world, not the filmmaker's uncertainty. Scenes bleed into each other with dreamlike disruption, emphasizing how fragile her grasp on reality has become. Even the film's infamous kills, remembered as wild set pieces, take on a somber quality. They feel less like slasher punctuation and more like distorted reflections of the protagonist's emotional turmoil. The elite academic setting, once viewed as a fashionable backdrop, becomes an isolating cage where pressure and expectation carve deep grooves into her psyche. Memory made it extravagant. A clearer viewing reveals a tragedy in disguise. Fact 9. The House on Sorority Row 1982. For many viewers, The House on Sorority Row lingers in memory as a glossy 80-second slasher, colorful parties, mischievous pranks, and a sorority house buzzing with youthful energy. But when the film is revisited without nostalgia's filter, the tone shifts dramatically. What once felt spirited now feels suffocating. The prank at the center of the story, recalled by many as a bit of playful recklessness, reveals itself to be rooted in cruelty, panic, and denial. The house, often remembered as vibrant and full of life, becomes a claustrophobic pressure chamber. Every hallway seems to grow narrower, every shadow heavier, as guilt begins to weave itself into the group dynamic. The girls misremembered as carefree archetypes appear fractured on rewatch. Their strained laughter and whispered arguments betray the truth. They know something has gone terribly wrong, and the weight of that knowledge hangs over every decision they make. Even the killer, flattened by memory into a generic slasher figure, takes on deeper meaning. He is less an outside threat and more the physical manifestation of consequences they hoped would disappear. The violence feels less like genre punctuation and more like the inevitable collapse of a secret too heavy to carry. Memory painted the film bright. The truth leaves it drenched in dread. Fact 10. Curtains 1983. Memory has reduced curtains to a singular image, a masked figure on ice, gliding through the fog toward an unsuspecting victim. It is one of horror's most iconic visuals, but it is also a distraction from the film's deeper, more devastating themes of ambition, manipulation, and emotional erosion within the entertainment world. The actresses, often remembered as stereotypes, reveal remarkable vulnerability upon rewatch. Their dreams are fraying, their confidence is bruised by an industry that treats them as interchangeable. The director, misremembered as merely demanding, emerges as a puppeteer pulling psychological strings, blurring the line between artistic pursuit and calculated cruelty. The fractured production, criticized for years, now feels like an extension of the film's instability. Scenes bleed into one another with a sense of unease, creating a tone that mirrors the character's slipping grasp on reality. The ice sequence, long admired for its beauty, becomes emblematic of the film's emotional core. A performance under impossible pressure, danger hidden beneath elegance, violence wrapped in silence. What nostalgia paints as camp was always a story about the cost of being seen and the greater cost of being ignored. Fact 11. Evil Speak 1981. Audience memory often files Evil Speak under camp, primitive computer graphics, satanic imagery, and over-the-top supernatural revenge. But a closer look reveals a story built less on spectacle and more on quiet torment, the kind that eats away at a person until something inside finally breaks. The protagonist, remembered as just another bullied kid, becomes a haunting figure when revisited. His loneliness is not framed for humor or melodrama. It is grim, aching, and constant. Every humiliation he endures pushes him further into emotional exile. When he turns to the computer, the film's most mocked element, its glow feels less silly and more like a beacon for someone desperate to be acknowledged by anything that will listen. What follows is not campy chaos, but the manifestation of a trauma that has nowhere left to go. The supernatural retaliation, often remembered as pure spectacle, plays more like a tragic eruption. His rage isn't stylized, it's the final consequence of a boy crushed beneath cruelty. Evil Speak may look dated, but its core remains painfully human. It isn't about demons, it's about what creates them. Fact 12. The Pit 1981. In cultural memory, The Pit often survives as a bizarre little film, an odd, eccentric tale about a boy and the strange creatures lurking in a forest pit. But when revisited, the film's tone shifts from quirky to quietly disturbing. The monsters are not the heart of the story at all, they're simply the shadows cast by something far more unsettling. A child's unraveling psyche shaped by isolation, neglect, and a hunger for connection that warps into something dangerous. The boy at the center, long remembered as an awkward misfit, becomes a figure of deep discomfort on rewatch. His interactions feel slightly off, tinged with desperation and a growing inability to distinguish between fantasy and reality. Moments once dismissed as odd or humorous now reveal cracks in his emotional stability. The creatures remembered as silly rubber puppets become extensions of his darkest impulses, physical stand-ins for the resentment and confusion building inside him. Even the forest, remembered as a basic horror setting, takes on symbolic weight. It becomes a refuge for secrets, a place where consequences dissolve and innocence mutates. The true horror is not the beings inside the pit, but what the boy becomes after discovering them. The Pit is not a strange children's horror story. It is a portrait of loneliness transforming into something unrecognizable. Fact 13. The Dorm That Dripped Blood, 1982. In collective memory, The Dorm That Dripped Blood is written off as a rough-edged, low-budget slasher, grainy visuals, familiar beats, nothing more than an early 80 seconds curiosity. But a rewatch dismantles that assumption immediately. Instead of chaotic fun, the film delivers a bleak, suffocating journey into abandonment and paranoia. The empty dormitory, remembered as just another horror backdrop, becomes a character itself. Its barren hallways exude a cold indifference. Its rooms echo with the sense that life has already drained away. The small group of students, who remain often misremembered as generic victims, reveal subtle cracks of fear and emotional fatigue. Their vulnerability feels sharper, their isolation heavier. The violence, which memory frames as conventional slasher brutality, hits differently when seen again. It feels cruelly matter-of-fact, stripped of spectacle, leaving behind a chilling sense of inevitability. By the time the film reaches its conclusion, the final twist doesn't shock because it is unexpected. It shocks because it affirms the hopelessness the film has been whispering from the very beginning. Memory dismissed it as forgettable. The film insists on being remembered for what it truly is, a quiet descent into despair. Fact 14. American Gothic, 1987. Over the years, American Gothic has been softened by memory into something eccentric, a strange, offbeat thriller with peculiar characters and an island frozen in time. But the film loses all traces of quirkiness once it is viewed again with clarity. Beneath its veneer of oddness lies a deeply disturbing look at emotional damage, collapsing belief systems, and the suffocating weight of isolation. The island, once remembered as quaint, becomes a place untouched, not by innocence, but by reality itself, a world shaped by rigid doctrine and festering trauma. The family at its center, so often misremembered as merely weird, reveals a chilling fragility. Their politeness feels rehearsed, their smiles stretch thin, their devotion a brittle shield against the madness creeping beneath the surface. The horror of American Gothic doesn't come from surprise attacks or supernatural twists. It comes from watching characters trapped in psychological loops they can never escape, clinging to rituals that no longer protect them. What nostalgia disguises as oddball humor is, in truth, a portrait of people consumed by the weight of their own delusions. Memory painted the film eccentric. Reality paints it tragic. Continue? Fact 15, Sweet 16, 1983. For many viewers, Sweet 16 survives in memory as a straightforward slice of early 80 seconds slasher cinema, teen drama, small-town tension, and a series of predictable killings. But when you revisit the film without the haze of nostalgia, its tone shifts dramatically. What once seemed like a familiar genre setup reveals itself as something far more unsettling, a quiet study of prejudice, loneliness, and unspoken hostility, woven into the fabric of a community that refuses to confront its own flaws. The town feels different on a second viewing. Its streets, once remembered as ordinary, seem charged with suspicion. The adults watch too closely. The teenagers speak with guarded bitterness. The air feels thick with judgment. The violence, which memory treats as routine slasher fare, emerges instead from the town's simmering tensions. Each death feels like the inevitable consequence of anger and resentment that no one dares name aloud. At the center of it all stands the girl audiences misremember as a mysterious outsider. Seen again, she becomes a symbol, someone onto whom the entire town projects fear, desire, and guilt. The horror doesn't come from her existence, but from the community's instinct to blame what it refuses to understand. Sweet 16 was never a carefree relic of its era. It was, and remains, a reflection of the darkness people are most comfortable forgetting. Bonus film, The Sender, 1982. In many people's recollection, The Sender floats somewhere between dream and abstraction, an artsy psychological thriller that feels more surreal than frightening. But a clear-eyed rewatch reveals a film that is far more invasive, intimate, and quietly harrowing than nostalgia ever acknowledged. Beneath its muted colors and soft lighting lies a story about trauma that refuses to stay contained. The young man at the center of the film, often remembered as blank or enigmatic, emerges instead as someone burdened by a pain so deep it radiates outward. His ability to send his nightmares into others' minds is not a stylistic flourish. It is a manifestation of a psyche overwhelmed, a suffering so intense it spills beyond his own body and into anyone close enough to feel it. His silence becomes its own form of violence, not intentional, but unavoidable. The hospital, flattened in memory into a sterile environment, now feels like an emotional pressure cooker. The staff shifts uneasily around him. Patients sense something is wrong. Reality bends in small, disquieting ways. Hallways stretch, lights hum. Dreams leak into waking life like water through cracked plaster. And his mother, once dismissed as eccentric, stands revealed as the root of a lifelong wound. Her suffocating control, her religious extremism, her refusal to release him from her grasp, they shape the boy's trauma as surely as the nightmares themselves. Her presence is spectral, looming even when she is not on screen. The visions, the dream melds, the psychic intrusions, they are no longer mysterious. They are cries from a mind that has been denied the right to heal. Memory softened The Sender into surrealism. A true viewing exposes a horror that feels uncomfortably real. Memory shields us sometimes gently, sometimes aggressively, from the parts of the past we're not ready to confront. It reshapes the disturbing, polishes the uncomfortable, and locks away the pieces that once left us shaken. But when those memories are unsealed, when the softened edges sharpen again, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. These 15 films were never the light, quirky, or exaggerated stories nostalgia claimed they were. They were darker, heavier, more honest. And now that you've seen them as they truly are, not as your mind chose to remember them, you may find yourself questioning what other shadows your memory has quietly rearranged. Return to the Night Shriek. Next time, we'll uncover the horrors that hide not in forgotten films, but in the spaces where memory refuses to look.